When a man buys a ticket for a Magical Mystery Tour, he knows what to expect. We guarantee the trip of a lifetime, and that's just what you get. The incredible Magical Mystery Tour. And here we are for day 3, and wow, the sun is out this morning. Feels slightly groggy, but today we're going to do the Magical Mystery Tour. What a glorious morning down at the Albert Dock. And it was like this yesterday in the afternoon. There's the other submarine boat. The Liver Insurance building and the town hall. There's Radio City. There you go.
Epstein, the manager of the group, and show how important he was, but also contrast his lifestyle with that of the Beatles. We're going to have a look at the schools and cottages, the role they played in getting John, Paul and George together, as well as seeing the place and telling the story of how John first met Paul back in 1957. Richard Starkey were all born here in Liverpool during the Second World War, which obviously meant, growing up in post-war Liverpool, very difficult times. Liverpool suffered a lot of bombing during the war, lots of the city centre was destroyed. Food rationing existed in the 1950s, so being a teenager in 1950s Britain, 1950s Liverpool, there wasn't much optimism. That all changed though in May 1956, when this record came out in this country. From that school, but also 2 boys who went to a school called the Liverpool Institute in the shadow of the Anglican Cathedral. Now very shortly folks, we're going to turn right at the traffic lights, and as we approach the second set of traffic lights, look over to your right hand side, see the enormous Anglican Cathedral, in the shadow of which is that school, and we'll go right past there towards the very end of the tour as well. Now John called the group the Quarrymen, after line in his own school song, but the Quarrymen didn't play rock and roll, but a type of music known as skiffle. Now I imagine some of you already heard skiffle, but if you haven't heard skiffle before, just listen to this. Little woman, gonna cook myself very soon. I got 90 miles of track, I'm going to find. Now folks, there's the cathedral on the right hand side. So yeah, that's an example of skiffle. Actually had its origin in New Orleans at the beginning of the 20th century. By the mid 20th century, it lost a lot of popularity in the United States. But in this country, it was enjoying a second wave of success with that Scottish skiffle singer there, Lonnie Donegan, big hero of John's. Of course, it's very, very easy to form a skiffle group compared to rock and roll. Basically, you just need homemade instruments. Thousands of these groups appeared throughout the whole country in the mid to late 1950s. In fact, in Liverpool around that time, they reckon there were around 700 groups playing skiffle. Now, between 1957 and 1958, there were around 20 different members of the Quarrymen, including Paul McCartney, who joined the summer of 1957, George Harrison in the February of 1958. But by the end of 1958, the group was down to just 3 members, John, Paul and George. They actually changed the name on a couple of occasions to Johnny and the Moondogs, J-Page 3, before splitting up. They weren't actually playing any gigs, and so John and Paul decided to concentrate on their songwriting. George Harrison joined a completely different group, the Les Stewart Quartet. But actually through George, the Quarrymen reformed at the end of August 59 with a guy called Ken Brown. Ken doesn't stay very long in the group, it's back down to just John, Paul and George. But suppose at the end of 1959 and 1960 when this began to really change. Because that's when an old-college friend of John's, a boy called Stuart Sutcliffe, who was actually born in Edinburgh, was Stuart entered one of his paintings into the John Moores Painting Prize here in Liverpool. He didn't actually win it, but John Moores himself loved the painting so much he actually bought it. So of course at that point Stuart had some money. John and Paul realised he had some money. And he thought it would be a great idea if he spent that money not to buy art materials but to buy a bass guitar. and became the first bass player of the Beatles, spelled B-E-A-T-A-L-S. And they chose the name Beatles as a tribute to the backing group of Buddy Holly, the Crickets. We've got Beatles, Crickets, they're all insects. They just changed the spelling of Beatles to reflect that music they're playing at that time, which was, of course, beat music. That's where we are now. And the club was at my lady called Mona Best in the cellar of the big old house she'd bought in that part of the city. The group used to play at the Casbah, and one was a group called the Blackjacks, whose drummer was the son of Mona Best, Pete Best. So John, Paul, George and Stuart saw Pete Best playing drums and thought he could solve the problem of finding his full-time drummer. Although I think the fact he had his own drum kit was also very important in their decision to ask him to audition, which of course he did in August of 1960. Pete passed the audition, and just a few days later John, Paul, George, Stuart and Pete set off for the first of those 5 visits to Hamburg, this time named the Beatles, of course spelt the way we know it. But folks, you probably know that Stuart Sutcliffe is more of an artist than a musician really. He left the group in 1961 to concentrate on his art, but also on his German girlfriend Astrid, before sadly dying the following year from a brain hemorrhage while living over in Germany. Of course, when Stuart left the group, that's when Paul McCartney took over full time on the bass. Singing to the Liverpool, unofficially known as Ringo Land. But as you imagine, that's not the real name. There are more well-known names, one being Toxteth, the Dingle, or just simply Liverpool 8. The area where Richard Starkey, better known as Ringo Starr, was born at home on 7th July 1940. Now folks, we're going to be approaching the end of the road, coming up on your left-hand side, where we'll be able to see the house where Richie was born. As you approach Madison Street, obviously the name of the street where he was born, you'll notice like the house on the left-hand side, just coming up here, we're being closed up at the moment. And for quite a while, there's a massive regeneration plan for this part of Toxteth. Up to quite recently, the idea was to demolish all the houses on your left-hand side and build some new ones, I suppose like those on your right. But it was very controversial for many reasons, not least if it happened, they would demolish the birthplace of Richard Starkey, born on 7th July 1940 at number 9 Madison Street. As you can see folks, from what you've already just gone past, you've already started to renovate the houses, and the idea now is to convert all the houses into bigger family homes. So great news for many reasons, not least that we still preserve the Richie, as I say, born on 7th July 1940 at number 9 Madison Street, the 5th house down here on the left-hand side. And those folks quite nicely are standing right outside the house as well. So if you go 5 doors down from the left, is the house with the lighter coloured brickwork, a little bit of green paint at the bottom, also like a bit of a poster on the wall as well. That's where Richard Starkey, as I say, was born on the 7th of July 1940. Now Richie was an only child, Mum Elsie and Dad Richie. But by the time Richie was 3, his mum and dad separated. And his dad moved out to number 9 Madison Street into number 59 to live with his mum and dad again. So as you can imagine, Richie's mum wasn't very happy having a husband in the same street, and she wanted to move. Now it's not the biggest house on the right-hand side, just before that second wheelie, purple wheelie bin. Those towards the back of the bus, we are going forward in a second everybody, looking for number 10 Admiral Grove, the pink and white house on the right, where Richie and his mother moved to in 1945. Now, as we move forward a little bit, look at this pub on the corner, the Empress. If anybody has seen that pub before, you'll have seen it on the front cover of Ringo Starr's first solo album, Sentimental Journey, which came out in 1970. So why did Ringo Starr put a picture of that pub on the album cover? But also, why did he include the types of songs that were on the album? Because it wasn't full of rock and roll, but old songs like Sentimental Journey, Bye Bye Blackbird, Love Is a Many Splendid Thing. Well, that was the pub that Richie's mum and stepfather used to go to on a Saturday night. She remarried in 1953, and so they were the types of songs he used to sing there. So in many respects, Ringo's first solo album became a tribute to his mum and stepfather. And if you get a chance to look at the album cover at some point, you see Ringo standing in that doorway just there on the left-hand side. But of course, in those days, folks, there was no free Wi-Fi. Restaurants these days, but also an area where 6 streets converge at the roundabout at Smith Down Place, one of which will be the next one. We're going to be turning left into. So as you turn right here, the first left actually is Penny Lane. And as you approach it, I imagine already you think of the song. Some of those places Paul mentioned the lyrics: the bank, the barber shop, the shelter in the middle of the roundabout. Well, as you turn left into Penny Lane in a second, you won't actually see those places at the moment, but don't worry, they do exist. They're just at the other end. What we're going to do, folks, is get off the bus at this end, get some photos with the road sign, and then when we get back on the bus, we're going to drive down to the other end of Penny Lane, and from the bus I'll point out the bank, the barber shop and the shelter, and then I'll explain why Paul wrote the song Back in 1966. Because there are many places around here that were not mentioning the song, but played a big role in their early lives, as they helped to explain why he wrote the song. And for example, these playing fields on your right hand side belong to Liverpool College. That's one of 6 different secondary private schools that Brian Epstein, the manager, went to. Later on, when we talk about Brian, I'll explain why I went to 6. So we're just about to park up on the left hand side. I'm going to get off the bus as I say.
Penny Lane.
Ông vill du ska ta en bild av honom så kan han ta en sån för oss.
Did you want a photo of the boat?
That's
all you're going to get for us.
Lane here. But strange, the world didn't actually know each other, despite the fact that John was in the same class as George's older brother Peter. So on your right hand side is Dovedale Road. The school is further up on the left hand side. On your left hand side right now though are a row of shops, the last one of which is a fish and chip shop, mentioned in the lyrics of the song. As much as one of the choir, a boy called Pete Shotton. Just the other side of the shelter is the bank. And what's he doing in the song? Going to get his hair cut. So as you go straight across here, as the road runs down to the left hand side, you can see a very small barber shop just on the corner here. Now it's Italian Slaven barber shop. Usually it was Italian barbers, Bioletti's, where John, Paul and George used to get the haircuts. So the barber shop mentioned in the song is that one just here on the left hand side as well. Now you don't know the Beatles song In My Life. Many people think it was one of the best songs that John ever wrote. But John actually wrote a version of the lyrics in which he mentioned a lot of specific places in Liverpool, none of which made the final version of the song. In the early version of the lyrics he actually mentions Penny Lane, but also Church Road. Now this is Church Road. Why was that important in John's life? Till he was 5.5 years of age, he lived at number 9, Newcastle Road, with his mother Julia and her family, while his dad Freddie was away during the Second World War. Newcastle Road is just here on the right. John Lennon's first family home is the 5th house down on the left hand side. But of course on today's tour folks, we're going to concentrate on John's life. Pretty much actually left that particular house and talk more about the relationship between John, his mum and his aunt. Being important, it wasn't the fact that in 1954 George passed an exam called 11+. It was an exam that if you passed it, you got a place at a grammar school, which is a more, should we say, academic type of high school. George got a place at Liverpool Institute for Boys. That's the school in the shadow of the big cathedral we saw before. Now who's not to the same school because he passed the same exam year before Paul, which of course meant that both Paul and George would share that same long bus journey from Speke into Liverpool to school and back home, about an hour each way. They became friends on that daily journey to and from school. Now Paul started playing with the Quarrymen in 1957. By that time he got to know George really well. He knew he and George had a similar taste in music. You know, they both loved rock and roll because they also loved classical guitar music as well. But Paul also knew that George was a really good guitarist. He thought it'd be a great idea if George could join the Quarrymen, because it was John's group, so Paul could not invite him to join. But Paul did think, if George and John meet, let's see what happens. So in December 1957, George went along to see the Quarrymen play, and Paul actually introduced John to George on the top deck of a double-decker bus on the way to that particular gig. Now when John first saw George, he wasn't particularly impressed because at that point John was 17 and George was only 14. So of course at that age, 3 years is a big gap. And what made it worse for George? He looked about 12, so for John that wasn't cool at all. However, just like the best Hollywood films, George got his guitar and he played this instrumental track called Raunchy, which impressed John, who straight away invited him to join the Quarrymen. Straight after the bookmakers. The first alley on the right hand side is Arnold Grove. George Harrison was born in the front room downstairs, number 12 Arnold Grove. Now unlike the case of Ringo Starr's area, where people live in the houses, so what we don't want to do is disturb them. So we get off the bus, have a look at the house. If you want a picture outside the house, no problem folks, but please nobody knock on anybody's door. It might be 5 to on Saturday it'll be 9.
They ever come out and start shaking their hand?
No. Number 12 on the right-hand side, folks. No.
Apart from his friends in North London, and he drives us to what the colours play it off, but so he's useful. No, he's
You've got a good gym down here, haven't you?
Steve Paris is excellent.
They've got his arms.
Belgian twins. Yeah, not in nationality, but in what's he done for your club? Nothing. It's ruined us.
You don't even come to watch us.
It's it. Thank you.
The thing is, you're Man City or you're Chelsea, and there's a million more.
George Harrison's house.
Yeah.
You know what they expected to see? Well, I imagine there was a group that looked like all the others, you know, a group wearing suits and being very, very polite to the audience as well. As they walked down the 18 steps into the dark, dim lit cavern, saw something very, very different. Before we carry on with the story about the importance of this particular record and Brian Epstein's first sight of the Beatles playing at the cavern, coming up on your left-hand side, you're going to see the former family home of the Epstein family. You're going to see very, very noticeably this big white detached house, very different in style to where Ringo was and where George was. Anyway, just come up on the left-hand side is the former family home of the Epsteins, just here as well. So very different in style to where George was, for example. How many bedrooms were there in George's? There were 2, well there were 5 in there. How many bathrooms were there in George's? There were none. Well, there were 2 in there and the library as well. On the 18th of June 1963, Paul McCartney was 21. Their 21st birthday breakfast cocktail party in that house, as you do. So the 9th of November, Brian Epstein walked into Matthew Street with his assistant Alistair Taylor, expected to see a group that looked like more or less everybody else around that time, with their suits, etc. As he walked into the cabin, he saw a group wearing leather jeans, leather jackets, cowboy boots, the style they quite over in Germany, eating, drinking, smoking, swearing on stage, playing with the backs of the audience as well. So Brian's opinion, a little bit rough and ready. But he liked the music. But he most liked about the music was the fact that they weren't just doing their own version of rock and roll tracks, but actually some of their own songs, including this one, which is supposed to be the first song that John Lennon ever wrote. Actually became it for the foremost Liverpool group about 2 years later.
When I see you passing by, I cry. Hello, little girl. When I try to catch your eye, I cry. Hello, little girl.
George, back in the hospital, not too far from the city centre. As I mentioned earlier on, the first 5.5 years of his life, he actually lived at number 9, Newcastle Road, with his mother Julia and her family, while his dad Freddie was away during the Second World War in the Merchant Navy. On one occasion, Fred Lennon disappeared for 18 months, without contacting Julia, who naturally assumed he's left me, I'll start my own life. But at the end of the war, Freddie came back, and so John had to make the decision, do I stay with my mum or go and live with my dad? But he eventually chose his mum. But the family weren't too happy about that, really. He wanted John to have a farm or stable family environment in which to live. So George's elder sister Mimi, of course John's aunt Mimi, who was 11 years older than John's mum was, took John in. That's how John came to live in this part of Liverpool with Aunt Mimi and Uncle George from 1945. A bit later on I mentioned a bit more about the relationship between John, his mum and his aunt. But just around the corner when John was living with Aunt Mimi and Uncle George was St. Peter's Church. Every summer, and sometimes to the end of June, occasionally at the end of early July, they have a church fete and to get funds for the church. Now the date of the fete in 1957 was the 6th of July. All the choirmen lived in the same parish as John, and the local vicar at the church knew about the group and thought it'd be great if they could actually play at the fete. Not because they were good, because clearly they weren't, but really as a way of attracting more young people to the event. So it was agreed that actually play on a stage, especially set up alongside the church in the afternoon, before moving just across the road into the church hall to play at the church dance in the evening. At the very beginning of the tour, Paul Matley impressed me first saw John performing with the Quarrymen, or performing this particular song with the Quarrymen. After they finished playing that set on that stage by the church, they came from behind the church to move across the road into the church hall on the other side of the road, where that famous meeting took place on the 6th of July 57. So, Paul impressed by John. Well, John was even more impressed when he first saw Paul playing the guitar, because all the things that John couldn't do with the guitar, like tune it and play guitar chords, Paul could. So Paul got hold of John's guitar, he turned it upside down because he was left-handed, he tuned it and he played this.
Well, I got and she's the queen. We're over drinking some Saturday night. All alone where I can hold her tight, but she lives on the 20th floor of town. The elevator's broken down, so I
Now, in connection with this next song,
look at all the lovely people.
at a stage where Paul would have seen John for the very first time would have been to the left of the church where we are now. They would have come from behind the church, down the road in the direction where we are at the moment, into the church, or actually on your right hand side. So just about to go past these brownstone houses on your right, just like you said, back from the road, you can see a bit of that apex roof and a circular window. That's the church hall where Paul performed 20 Flight Rock, which impressed John so much, he liked him to join the Quarrymen. And on your left hand side is a cemetery. Now one of the graves closest to the church is a grave with the name Eleanor Rigby on it. And Paul's always said there's no connection. The song he wrote in 1966, and of course the woman buried in the grave back in 1939. He says the inspiration for the name Eleanor came from the actress Eleanor Bron who appeared in the film Help. Rigby, there's a bit more doubt about that. Some theories suggest it could have been some wine merchants in Bristol, where Paul spent a lot of time with his actress girlfriend Jen Asher in those days, or even a very old pub in Liverpool, very close to the cavern. By the way, folks, how strange is it? In the cemetery belonging to the church where John and Paul met, somebody called Eleanor Rigby. He says it's just coincidence. I'm not sure myself. As we go past the church, you see on the left hand side like a purple sign, just here on the left. Just the other side, you can just see like a little alley, a little lane, a bit of a small lane I suppose. At the end of which you can just see a small sort of building at the end. That's more or less where that stage was set up that afternoon with Paul and John performing for the very first time. So why was it called Strawberry Field? Well, it used to be a field full of strawberries there, nothing more than that. But also up to late 19th century Victorian merchants' mansion house. Just imagine this enormous imposing building set in very, very extensive grounds, surrounded by lots of trees, which in 1936 was given to the Salvation Army. That's where they opened up an orphanage. And this is the Strawberry Field, without the S at the end, the John got to know when they were around the corner with that Mimi and Good George from 1945. Now John spent a lot of time playing in the grounds of Strawberry Field and playing with the kids staying at the orphanage. Because even though John wasn't an orphan himself, because he wanted to live with his mum and dad, he just felt in common with the kids that were staying there. But despite the fact John wasn't with his mum and dad, he had a very, very comfortable life living with Aunt Mimi and Uncle George. Also life surrounded by books. And the two types of books that John loved reading in particular, one of the Rickmal Crompton books, about that Norwich Rebel schoolboy called William Brown. Well, John thought he was William Brown. And like William had a gang of friends, he called them the Outlaws. Because a lot of them joined John years later in the Quarrymen. John's also a massive fan of Lewis Carroll. In many respects, these two worlds came together in the grounds of Strawberry Field. The world of William the Naughty Schoolboy and the world of Alice in Wonderland. So when John wasn't walking the road where we are now, into the gates of Strawberry Field, he climbed over the wall behind his house. And once over that wall, he found himself in this magical world where, as John said in the song, nothing was real, but he found John's imagination, and inspired many of his lyrics. The Eggman, the Walrus. And indeed, the inspiration for some of the lyrics in Lucian Sky with Diamonds came from those books he was reading around the corner from Strawberry Field. John was living. So John began a lot of time at his mum's house playing with his two sisters. But despite the fact he spent a lot of time at his mum's house with the sisters, there's no emotional connection at all between John and his mum. And you have to look at rock and roll, see the difference between Julia and a much older sister Mimi, but also rock and roll is the way that John became close to his mum for sadly the only time in his life. And John started playing rock and roll in the late 1950s, and Mimi wasn't very impressed. She felt John was wasting his time. She always said to John, playing the guitars all very well, John, but you never ever make a living out of it. And when she was at home, he could have music in one place. It's actually in the porch below his bedroom. But Julia, John's mum, was a real rock and roll fan. He loved Elvis. In fact, Julia touched on those banjo chords he was playing when Paul saw performing at the church fete. So 1957-58, John's life was getting much better. He was close to his mum, and he had a group, the Quarrymen. Things improved even further on the 12th of July 58, when the Quarrymen recorded this version of a Buddy Holly song.
Well, that will be the day when you say goodbye, yeah, that will be the day when you make me cry, you say you're gonna leave. We'll never disappear.
Okay folks, up at the right of the traffic lights. Now up on the left hand side there's a cemetery. It was actually in that cemetery where John's mum Julie was buried, but also where Stella Black was buried just a couple of years ago as well. That's the cemetery there on the left hand side.
It always leads me here.
So James Paul McCartney was born on the 18th of June 1942 in Walton Hospital.
Fourth Lynn Road. Paul McCartney's house down here. Mull of Kintyre, do.
Paul's brother Mike took loads of photographs, and those photographs are placed around the house. Paul and Mike in that front room. Richard loves you, I'll follow the sun, I saw her standing there. When I'm 64, Paul wrote, probably before he met John really, I suppose. But there's a link to this house and another song of Sgt. Pepper, A Day in the Life that John wrote years later. But Paul wrote the bit in the middle that woke up, got out of bed, dragged the coat across my head. When he wrote that bit in the middle, I remember living in this house, being late for school, running out the front gate, running the road, and catch the bus, seconds back. We are going to be saying, we're not going to run, we are going to walk through the same journey from that bus, again going through Penny Lane, stop by the schools and colleges and finish off the world famous Cavern Club. And Paul McCartney, when he played Liverpool 2015, was laughing on stage at the idea of people standing outside his house. He could not believe it, people would be able to stand outside his house. And very often when he's in Liverpool, he'd get into his car, he'd drive up here, and I'd love to see him standing outside the house. He'd have a laugh at the idea and he'd drive up. So you never know, he might be actually laughing at us right now. He actually came back to Liverpool last August with his youngest daughter Beatrice. He showed the house for the very first time. He wasn't on the normal tour, he was a private visit to arranged by man as well. But as I say folks, there are 4 tours a day. Who said they're going on it tomorrow? Yeah. Are you in the afternoon from Speak or from Liverpool? Oh, the jury's in as well. I think there are 4 tours a day. The last one of the day, I believe, leaves from Speak Hall, which is down near the airport. That's also National Trust property. But there are 3 tours. Go.